So after I dropped off the patient, me and Jack, we started manoeuvred the trolley out of the CCU, and at the entrance the nurse who'd just been bitchy to us and put us down was waiting, and she said, "Have a pleasant evening," with that kind of that sort of gotcha smile on her face. And I turned and I said, "We will, thank you, and you have a nice evening too." "We will, because we're hospital porters. We have pride and dignity that no one could take away from us." And she glared at me, and she walked on. I walked on without another word, and she said, she came up later. She said, "Oi, what do you think you were doing there? What do you think? What do you mean by that?" And I said, "I just wished you a pleasant evening. What's wrong with that?" "I'm going to report this," I said. She said, "I'm going to report this." I said, "Report us for what? We haven't done anything wrong." And there's nothing she can do about it. See, this is why dignity statements are so good. Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Welcome to HPANWO TV. It's May the 31st, 2017. It's the eve of St Theo's Day. And I've come back to my old workplace? My old home. What was the centre of my life for 23 years. The John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. And I'm going to take you and show you a few of the places within it, or from public land, and talk a little bit about my life there. This is the best place to get a view from the hospital, in the sense that this is about as close as you can get to the hospital without being on the hospital site. And I'm not going to actually film on the hospital site, as I said. I'm going to respect the privacy of the people in the hospital and the rules regarding media in the hospital. It's just something I've always done, despite, well, several claims to the contrary when they were actually kicking me out. But now, what I did was, when I got into the hospital portering service, was I went on a relief tour. Now this is, they put all new hot porters on that. What they do is they put you on a, they basically, you get no regular, you don't join any particular shift section or any departmental section. You are put on a situation where you fill in for other people who are absent, or who are not around. You fill in for people on holiday or sick, etc. People who are taking leave for whatever reason. You'll be sent there, and if there's no space for you, they just put you in a supernumerary capacity. So it's not like you're not on a 0 hours contract. You still get your 40 hours a week, 39 plus 1 overtime standard. It's just that your primary job is to supply departments who are short of porters. This was in the days when they decided to get rid of. They decided to just let departments and shift sections run short. But after a year, I did something. Well, I started off in this building you see behind me used to be JR1. Now that was the original John Radcliffe Hospital. It was opened in 1973 by the Queen Mother, her reptileness herself, and it was the original John Radcliffe. This was housed the maternity services that were moved up from the Churchill Hospital in that year when the place opened. Now I spent a lot of time over there, because on my relief tour I spent most of my time covering a man called Ron Oliver, who was he was on long-term sick. He had a heart attack, and he was off sick for months and months and months before he eventually retired. So he was off sick for about a year, I think, altogether, and then he just retired. So I never met him, even though I was covering for him. But then I did, that's not my only duty. I was also put elsewhere. I was put elsewhere on relief, on X-ray. I did it on my second day in portering, and I was put onto X-ray. Not as going around with someone else, being taught the job. But after that, I did something which, in reflection, was pretty stupid, although it probably was for the best. Like a lot of bad things that have happened to me in my life. It's pretty unpleasant when you're in the middle of it, but it actually does build your character, and at the end of it, you come out wiser. You come out sadder and wiser, and it probably makes you you're better able to handle things than you were before. I went into the delivery suite. Now the delivery suite is still where it was before. Now this building's changed quite a bit, like the rest of the hospital has. I'll show you some more of it in a minute. But the wards, the block in the middle there, goes up to level 7. That is actually that's a ward block. Below that is actually the delivery suite. It's on level 2. It's on basically the upper of those 2 floors you see in front of you, on the lower segment below the superstructure. There's those windows over there. Those windows there. Oh, where I missed my hand, where I'm trying to point. Oh, there. Those windows there are delivery rooms. You turn that viewfinder around. Those are delivery rooms, those windows. You come along here, there's some offices and things. And there's a couple of walls which are blank. There are no windows. Those are operating theatres where they perform things such as caesarean sections. Now, there's some trees there that actually weren't there until quite recently. I think they were planted and have grown up there, or they maybe were little saplings when I was there. But you used to be able to see all the way to the end of that wall. And that was all the deliveries. That was the delivery suite theatres. There was 2 theatres, Theatre 1 and 2, and then there was 3 and 4. And you see that second area with no windows there, right? That was theatres 3 and 4. They were known as forceps theatres, where forceps deliveries were carried out. Theatres 1 and 2 were mostly for trial of forceps, which is where they tried to get a baby out by forceps, and if it didn't work out, resort to caesarean section, or just plain caesarean sections. And this is the busiest maternity unit in the country. It was when I was there. 8,000 deliveries a year. I think that's doubled now. I think it's still the busiest maternity unit in the country. John Radcliffe Maternity is actually world famous. It's world famous everywhere. It's world famous for its expertise. Professor Turnbull was based here. Now below that you can see the outpatients there. Now you'll notice that it's changed. It's actually not called JR1 Maternity now. It's called Women's Centre. Yes. It is called the Women's Centre. Now basically what happened was they moved gynecology. The gynecology services from the Churchill Hospital were moved up to JR1, the original John Radcliffe. This would have been, I think it was, because I remember there used to be kitchens down below. The level 1 below the delivery suite used to be all kitchens, and then they changed it. They brought up the women. They brought up the gynecological services from the Churchill, and created the Women's Centre. And it's very sort of, it would have been about 1995 to 98. I was in delivery suite for 9 years, from around about 1991 to 1999. So it's about 8 years. Yeah. About 8 to 9 years I was in there. And gynecology was moved up in that time, where it was replaced. There was some offices there was the kitchens and things like that. Now of course, Women's Centre is very politically correct. It is very culturally Marxist. The very name Women's Centre it says it all, doesn't it? And this was when this was very, very important. It was a very painful thing I had to go through, very, very painful experience that lasted a few years, but it was very, very important to me, because it was when I first encountered the dark side of feminism. Now, feminism is an evil for which there's nothing for a white heterosexual male like me. There is virtually nothing in society to prepare you for encountering the sickness of feminism, apart from very bitter, raw, painful experience. You're not taught about it. You're not taught that feminism is anything but something wonderful and something progressive and beautiful and liberating for everyone. It's only through your own experience that you learn that's not the case. And I had a crash course. I crammed. It was because it was then I encountered this. Funny enough, this actually happened while I was there, because it was not a problem when I first started. This wasn't an issue, but later on, it was after I think the gynecological services moved up there, and that's where this is what you'd expect with cultural Marxist thought. It sneaks up it comes up in what tends to come up in, appears, it builds up, and then suddenly, wham, it's there, and then it affects everything. There was a distinct campaign. Well, it wasn't a campaign. There was a distinct. There was no official policy was passed. I mean, you can't pass official policy because, believe it or not, the Equal Opportunities Act and the Equality Act still does not officially state that white heterosexual men cannot be the beneficiaries of the law. It doesn't officially state that, but it's always between the lines. It's always there in invisible ink. And so there was a definite climate of suggestion that perhaps male porters should not be permitted to serve in delivery suite because of the nature of our work. Obviously, I have to deal with women who are having babies and things like that. I did so professionally and diligently as any doctor. And I did. Now, funnily enough, no one ever suggested that doctors couldn't be men, or like obstetricians couldn't be men. It was only porters. It was only the lowest of the low. And again, this is what you'd expect, because feminism is essentially a middle-class vice. It is. Someone described it as racism for the rich, and I think that's very true. But I wasn't handed my hat, but I found out people with the staff, especially the new staff, were less friendly towards me. As time went on, the older midwives who were very, very close to me, I loved, and who loved me, they began to retire, they began to leave, as people in healthcare do in these professions, because basically they couldn't handle the stress. I mean, the stress of being a midwife is like a nurse plus 50%, with only about 10% more money. And in those days, you had to have a nursing diploma to study as a midwife. But you then went on a 2-year midwifery course on top of your nursing. But then it all changed. It changed because they started having direct entry midwives. These were midwives who did a single 3-year course without having a nursing degree or nursing diploma. It used to be a diploma in those days. Now it's always a degree, for which you don't get on the job. You don't get on the job training. You have to take out a loan and be a normal student if you want to be a nurse now. When I first started, you actually got a salary. You were trained up on the job. Same with midwives. Now, the direct entry midwives, this was the distinct difference. There's no doubt that they were indoctrinated with cultural Marxism in their training. Because it was then, when they started getting into positions of authority within the hospital, that suddenly the idea of male porters was off-putting and disgusting. Even though nobody complained. The midwives I knew before were absolutely fine with male porters being there. The patients, very, very few patients subjected to male members of staff. It's only when, Muslims, of course, demand female staff, but they don't distinguish between. I didn't find people were distinguishing between doctors and porters. It was only after the direct entry midwives came about. Now, I would like to be able to tell you right now, if I wanted to paint a rosy picture of myself, was it the highlights reel, as Slaxer calls it, that I put up a brave fight for men's rights in that hospital, and I went down fighting like a crusader, but I didn't. I quit. And moved over to the general side. I mean, I do think maybe I regret that, actually. I regret not making more of a fuss about it. The thing is, Unison, my trade union, they wouldn't back me up. They're the most culturally Marxist organisation imaginable. I mean, I emailed the anti-bullying officer at Unison, who was a woman called Wendy, and she never replied. So if it'd been the other way around, if it was a female member of staff being subjected to sexist abuse, she would be onto it like a greyhound out of a trap. So this is one. See, I mean, years before, I'd become very disenchanted with. I'd become very, very disenchanted with trade unionism. I'd actually quit basically trade unionism because of this very reason. Because I felt that as if you were a white heterosexual male, you had no place there. They didn't want you were tolerated as long as you hated yourself. As long as you were willing to accept the blame for everything bad in the world and accept that you were part of the problem, and you had to drum that white heterosexual masculinity out of you in order to be a good person. So I left and I went over to theatres, and I'll show you. Well, I'll show you the main. I went over to the main hospital, and this is the. What you can see now is what's now called the main. Oh, let me get the focus right. That there. Now that is what's called today the main hospital. It used to be called JR2 because this was the second phase of construction. It was finished, I think, in 1975. Now, this hospital has been under constant construction since the first brick was laid, over a period of nearly 50 years now. It's been built in various phases. Phase 1 was the maternity, which I just showed you. Phase 2 was the main hospital, known as JR2, John Radcliffe 2. And then it went on. I'll show you some more. I'll show you the phases. Then there was the cardiac centre in 1986, and then the West Wing in 2007, I believe. Basically, I went over there to the main hospital. This is the largest teaching hospital in Britain, and I ended up as a theatre porter. And I'll show you the theatres. I will show you the theatres now. Okay, I'm just doing a little circumnavigation of the hospital, going round the hospital site. As you see, it's a huge hospital. It's 900 beds. It's the biggest teaching hospital in Britain. I'm just going round it. I'm going down this road here, which is one of the roads which borders the hospital. Now, I'll say a few more words because I'm going to show you the theatres. Well, I think I can't show you the theatres because the theatres are, again, are windowless. It's a windowless area within the hospital. And this is funny because, I mean, these are these. It is a very restrictive life when you think about it. It's not unlike being a submariner. Oh, in a way. I mean, delivery suite, as I said, delivery suite was a windowless cubicle. It's funny because, like, I got into portering when I portering represented a new hope for me when my professional life was in turmoil and I'd been devastated. It must be a bit like David Icke when he had to quit football, when he quit football with arthritis at the age of 21. I was at the age of 18, and I'd pinned all my hopes and all my future dreams on the Royal Navy. And when they rejected me, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I had no idea what I wanted to do in my life. Portering came along when after I, as I said, portering came along after I got a job at the hospital, just doing some menial work in an office, filing and sorting and making cups of coffee and cleaning up and things like that. And I was a general office dog's body, basically. I'll actually show it to you in a minute. If I can get around to see it. It was in the Manor House Annex. I'll show you that in a minute. Although that's when I first got in. I found out about the porters and I decided I wanted to be a part of that. But portering represented a new hope for me. But I was, like I said, when I was in delivery suite, I mean, you go into delivery suite, so I'm covering an awful lot of different points at the same time now. I'm rambling a bit. But hospital portering, you know, the porters have lots of freedom. I mean, and I did later on when I got into general portering, because I could go all over the hospital site. I mean, there were 45 miles of corridors in the John Radcliffe Hospital. Someone told, I think, and I well believe them. You stretched all the corridors end to end, they go all the way to London, because there's those sub basements as well. And so I had a lot of freedom. Yet my first actual sectional deployment was into delivery suite, which was, like I say, it's behind those walls I showed you. Just a few rooms, basically, a few rooms and a couple of small corridors, operating theatres, the service rooms, the store rooms, the porter's lodge. You know, it's maybe 50 feet square. And it was windowless, there's no sunlight. Yet I was in there for 9 years. Like I said, I spent at least 40 hours every week in there. So it's a very, very claustrophobic kind of existence in a way, if you think about it. It's kind of claustrophobic. Right, I can actually get a great view from in here, actually. I'm just going to go and film in here, because you get a great view of the main hospital from here. And I can show you a few things here. If I find a bench to sit on, that's even better, but not to. I'm going to go in here. But fundamentally, you know, where was I? So I'm just going into this park now. And I get a great view of the hospital here from here. So you get a fantastic view of the hospital from here. Look at that. I forgot about this park. Now, I went over to the main hospital. You see a corner of it there. I said this was my home. This was my home by every definition of the word home. It was. I mean, it wasn't my. I didn't live on. I mean, I always lived off site. I mean, there is staff accommodation here, and some of the porters actually lived for some or all of their service in the staff accommodation. I'll show you the staff accommodation block later. So they actually lived in the on the hospital site. I never did. I was a porter went home at night. But this was my home by every single definition that you could give the word home. It was where I felt more comfortable than anywhere else.
Now, this is again. I have to get personal and talk about personal things again. Now, you've watched my video, WTF does Feminism mean, where I talk an awful lot about my family and my feelings to do with my family. This is very, very important because as I said in that video, I talked about my mum. Now there's the old main hospital. Now you can't see so much of it as you. Now, if I'd come here 20 years ago, you'd have seen a beautiful ivory-coloured square block all along there. Now you can't see it because there's the Children's Hospital in the West Wing and there's the Cardiac Investigation Centre, right? But that used to be just a clear white wall with windows in. And interestingly, I actually found out that the reason the hospital was covered with white tile, it wasn't just for decoration. The reason the hospital was covered with white tile was because this was during the Cold War. If there'd been a nuclear explosion nearby, the white tile would have reflected the heat of the blast and hopefully prevented the building catching fire. So, because it was intended to be used by the government, the emergency government after a nuclear war. So that is the main hospital there. Now, where was I? Yeah, this was my home. This was more of a home in a way than I had. So when I first got into portering, I told you about my. I've told you about my my problems with my family. In the video, what WTF does Feminism mean? I'll put a link in the description box if I can remember. But I did tell you that I think I mentioned it in that film. If I didn't, then again, this is painful personal stuff I have to bring out to you. So do bear with me. But it was only several years after my mum died that I realised the full extent of what she'd done to me. And the worst thing, in terms of her emotional abuse, and I think the worst thing that she did to me was she deprived me of a father. She took the man who should have been my father, and she turned him into a quivering, jellified robot to which she had the remote control. It was only after she died that I got a father for the first time. And I have a father now. He's 68, he's not young, but he's my dad. And for the first time he really is my dad. Because the controller has now given up the remote control because the controller is dead. So he's no longer under the jurisdiction of the remote control that she held in her hand. So when I entered portering, I was essentially, I was essentially entering it as like a man who'd grown up as a single son to a single father, and to a single mother. I mean, Stefan Molyneux's done some great videos. He did one recently about the ugly truth of single motherhood, about how it is such a terrible thing for bringing up children, especially boys. I mean, I wasn't literally a single child, but I think because, as I said, my dad was nothing more than an automaton under the control of my mum. Who's there to teach me to be a man? So I entered hospital portering as a kind of as a maybe someone mentally much younger than I was. I was 18 physically, but mentally I was much younger. And the porters, because the thing about hospital portering was and still is male dominated. It was never completely men. It was never. I don't remember a time, because there were 74 porters when I started. I think it was one woman at the time, and I don't think it was ever a time. There was usually 2 or 3 all through my career. I don't recall a time when there were no women at all in portering. There probably was, actually, because portering is male dominated. I know it's the feminists don't object to that. They don't object to male-dominated jobs so long as that job is low-paid, dirty, and unglamorous. It's the CEOs and the professors they complain. Well, there's not enough women here. It's coal miners, dustmen, hospital porters. Let the men have those. So it was a male. It was a male environment. So I grew up. I experienced. I think I experienced masculine role models for the first time in my life when I joined the hospital portering service. And these men, these older men, became surrogate fathers to me. One or two in particular, I think, really almost adopted me. And so I had that, I suppose, which I wouldn't otherwise have had. I mean, how the boys who like grow up and go off to university, how the hell do they cope? I mean, it's awful. Well, the air ambulance is landing. It's the air ambulance. I can hear it. I'll show you the pad in a minute. I'll show you if I can get close enough. I'll show you the air ambulance landing pad. You could have heard it then, yeah. Shame I didn't catch that on camera. But it was coming from the other. They tend to come in from the other side. They come in from the north, and they come in. The hospital faces the cardinal points. Anyway, I mean, like I said, how do guys cope? The guys who go off to university, you know, how the children of the middle classes. How on earth do they cope? Because they go straight from like single parent families, or families where, you know, the families are completely indoctrinated by cultural Marxism, and they go straight into university, which is they get more cultural Marxism. So how do they cope? I mean, it's awful. Not to say that girls have got it easy, because they haven't. Girls suffer the same way. Cultural Marxism is designed to attack us all. Black, white, rich, poor, man, woman, gay or straight. We're all the targets of cultural Marxism. It doesn't favour, it's not against any particular group of people, even though it may seem that way. So, I mean, this is where I was lucky. I suppose I'm lucky for being working class. I mean, the thing about, you often hear how working class people have it tough, and working class people have it really tough, and, you know, the middle classes grow up in this cushioned, privileged environment. But I don't agree. I think it's the other way around. I think to be working class is to be sheltered from a lot of this sickness, this mental disease, this mental poison, because it's being deliberately done to us. It's working class men like me, I think, who have it easy. We're the ones who don't get all this toxicity shoved down our throats, because the working classes are still a cultural island of masculinity within the working classes, and portering is a part of that. Portering was, and hopefully still is, a masculine institution, an institution of masculinity, where you can learn to be a man. You can be alongside other men. As a young man, that's very important, and develop male role models, etc. That is very important. So I was in hospital portering, and they basically brought me up in a way my dad couldn't. Because, well, I don't want to be hard on my dad, because I don't blame my dad. I love my dad. But he wasn't the man then that he is now. Since my mum died, he has transformed. He has blossomed like a flower, and he's got himself a nice lady, a girlfriend now. A nice lady, actually, a very likeable lady, and he's very much in love with her, and she's in love with him, and she's very, very different to my mum, I'm glad to say. Because I mean, I tried to boost his self-esteem when after my mum died, because I knew you can warn him all you like, you know, you find out, you know, you'll get some gold digging old cow. You know, don't be careful, don't fall for it, don't. But I knew the only way for him to find a partner who treated him better was for him to have his self-esteem boosted. My mum blamed him for everything. My mum used to denigrate him. She used to talk down to him in front of guests. Oh no, I'm going off topic here. I can't go into too much about that. But basically, I think I boosted his self-esteem, and me and my brother both did, and he found himself a decent woman, because he believes he believes he deserves it, and he's getting what he deserves now. So so there's a bit of family history there, but I moved over into the general theatres. Now the general theatres are, you can't see them actually, but do you see that row of windows there? Look at that row of windows, right? go down, so that's level 7, level 6, level 5, and then you can't see it because it's behind the cardiac investigation annex. But then there's level 4 and there's level 3, which is partly open because it's like an atrium, and there's the restaurant and the kitchens. And there's level 2, which is the main entrance on the other side, because the hospital is actually built into the side of a sloping hill. So the ground level on JR1 is level 2, and you come down to the women's section minus level lower ground 2. So it's built on so what's the basement here is open. So what's open here is the basement over there, basically. But you go down into level 2, go down to level 1, and that is where the operating theatres are. And again, there's no windows to them. They're completely interior. And so again, I lived in this kind of like subaquatic life. You know, manning the periscopes and loading the torpedo tubes, or the other things you did in there. In these operating theatres, the operating theatre is actually very, very similar to delivery suite in many, many ways. It's very similar, except it's a much bigger operation. It's a much bigger. It's a far, far bigger. A far, far bigger institution. There were actually 10 theatres. Rather than the 4, well, there's 2 main theatres and 2 forceps theatres in delivery suite. There was 10 main theatres in the general suite. There was like there was the trauma theatre, then there was the 3 general surgical theatres. No, there were 5 general surgical theatres, and there were 3 cardiac theatres. And the cardiac services were separate, but they were in the same area. They were in the same area. But I mean, again, John Radcliffe has, in terms of its background, it is one of the leading cardiac centres in the world. It's world famous. In fact, it was in our theatres. And I was on duty at the time that they installed the first Jarvik heart pump, which is basically an artificial heart, which works by a turbine effect. So a person has no actual pulse, but their blood's flowing. They did it first in there. And I was on duty at the time. It was a long well, I was on duty for some of the time because the operation took all day. But it was good. It was good. How long was I in theatres for? I was in theatres from 1999 to 2005. 7 years. 7 very happy years. And literally, it was happy all the way through till the very end. How I actually got kicked out of theatres is something different. I mean, as I said, I didn't make a stand in delivery suite. But which I wish I had done against the sexism in there. But I did afterwards. I actually did go afterwards to. I went up to the guys in. I mean, the good thing, they did have they sort of had about, at one point they had about 3 female porters and 1 male porter in there. And I went and I said, look, you realise that this is all being done. They're deliberately putting female porters only in here. And I spoke. The guys didn't seem all that bothered. And I mean, even the women, the female porters, actually understood where I was coming from, and one of them was particularly supportive of me. And it seems to have died down though, because I did go up to those guys, and all of them, including the women, and I said, look, you really should put in a claim, saying you should put in a complaint about sexism in this department. And they never did. And the thing is, the guys the guys on main side, we went along with it. Most of them went along with it. You know why? Because delivery suite was such an unpopular duty that people hated covering it, because sometimes the general guys would have to go in there and cover, and they hated it because it's awful. Because it's basically such hard work. It's the toughest job in portering by far. The toughest. It's the most complicated, the most skilled, and the most heavy in terms of physical work. They hated it, and of course, by then the direct entry midwives were ruling the chute, and they just were treated like dirt off their feet. And so everyone hated it. So they said, it's really a woman's job, that. It's a woman's job, delivery suite. And so they went along with it because it meant, if it was a woman's job, because there's so few women in portering, that nearly everyone was exempt from it, you see. I don't blame them one bit. But I did go over there and I did say to the guys, you should say something about sexism. You could put in a complaint for sexism because of this particular, saying we want female porters only. Now, they didn't, and the good thing news is though, I do keep in touch with guys in there. Of course, I have my contacts on the inside. You know who you are if you're watching, and they told me that actually there are now, it's gone back to an all-male staff there, which means that this policy, whatever it is, whatever kind of unofficial policy was installed, seems to have failed. And I wish it was the same. I wish it was the same at the BBC and other places where they have gender quotas and things like that. But by then I was in general side. Now, the reason I left, I didn't leave so much. Well, I did kind of leave. I was kicked out basically, but I did leave voluntarily. I took a voluntary transfer to General Porter's main hospital. But the reason I got kicked out of theatres is actually a very long story. It's a very long story indeed. And as with my dismissal, I mean, I've done a video called Ben the Civilian where I talk about my final discharge from the hospital portering service. It's a very long story, but basically, I'm going to need to do my own article and my own film. What I'll do is later, maybe talk a bit more about it later, because I'm going to show you some of the pages on the HPWA blog. Okay, and I'll maybe talk a bit more about it then. But basically, I'm going to write an entire article explaining why I was kicked out of theatres. But anyway, we should go and have a look at the hospital from another angle, because I want to show you more of the West Wing and the Children's Hospital here. I want to show you more of that, and you can probably see it better from the cemetery at North Way. So I'm going to go there next, and see what we. And also, you may be able to see something at the helicopter pad as well. So let's head there now. Thanks very much. There's the trauma unit there. We're on the farther side of the hospital now. There's the main hospital behind it. Cardiac Investigations Annex. The brown building is the old 1986 cardiac unit. And there's the Children's Hospital. I'm going to go through here into Northway Cemetery, which is a good place to talk quietly and stuff like that. And also, it's kind of like the Groom Lake Road of the John Radcliffe Hospital. I've talked about this before. When I came actually here in 2012 to do a video called Ben the Civilian, which was actually all about me being kicked out of the hospital portering service, and I did lament that I was now banned from the hospital site, yet I was able to sit just a couple of dozen feet from the boundary of what was my home. So near yet so far. See if I can find the same bench and sit on that. But yeah, I just see the hospital site is so huge. It could take, it takes a good 20 minutes even to walk around it. And you're in this amazing place. See this necropolis here, this huge cemetery. This is Northway Cemetery in Oxford. And of course, life and death are never far apart in the hospital. People die in the women's centre, babies are born. The thing about this, I mean, this is the difficult thing to have to deal with, and this affects my personal life too, because I lost my first child to stillbirth, as I've explained in couple of my previous videos now. I sit down here. Oh, so I take a seat. Yeah. There's the old hospital in the back. As I've explained, the maternity unit, it's not always happy endings. Little babies die. Babies haven't even had a chance at life. Something fundamentally wrong with about that, isn't it? There's something fundamentally twisted about the universe when that happens, when a baby dies before they're even born, or during birth, or soon after birth, when they haven't had a chance to live. It's the worst thing in the world. And it happened to my daughter Alice. I've talked about that on a previous video. Now, funnily enough, those windows, you see the white building there, on you see one floor down from the top. Okay, that's level 3 and there's level 2. Right, level 2 and level 1. So it's the first and second row of windows down from the top. That is neurology intensive therapy unit. So that's like the intensive care area for the neurology section. Because what happened was all this you see before you here, this huge building here. I think there's 380 beds altogether in that palias. That was that was all moved up from the old Ratcliffe Infirmary. I don't know if I've shown you the old Ratcliffe Infirmary site, but it's this old hospital, 280-year-old hospital, was shut down, and all its services were moved here, and including the neurology services, and all the staff did. The porters came as well. Oh yeah, Ratcliffe Infirmary porters, and my old friend Kevin. My brother porter, he's closer than a friend. My brother porter Kevin came, and I was on the same because Kevin, I'll tell you about Kevin. Kevin's a good guy. Kevin is one of my closest friends in the hospital portering service. I'm actually meeting him next week. We still meet up and keep in touch quite regularly. He was originally in theatres with me. Now, he's originally in maternity with me. Then he moved over. The stupid twat went in delivery suite, didn't he? And within 6 months later, he moved to the Ratcliffe Infirmary. He got a job in there. He's a good worker, Kevin, so they took him on immediately. Then when the Ratcliffe came here, the old Ratcliffe, he came with it and served in. He's still serving there in the West Wing. He's inside those walls now, probably, unless he's on his day off. Lives in Kennington with his parents. Good guy, one of the best. As I said, the porters. The relationships I had with my brother and sister porters were so close, and it was such a tight bond, a band of brothers, such an intimate bond, being in that place together, sharing that experience, which you couldn't share with anyone else outside. It's not something we could ever take out and show other people. It was just something we ourselves had. It was incredible. I made incredibly deep friendships with people in there, not just the porters but some of the civilians as well. People I'll never forget. Most I'm still in touch with in one way or another. I have reunions every so often. In fact, like I said, I'm having a St Theo's party on Monday, so I'm having a kind of reunion. As if you go to the panel, go to the HPANWO blog, there's details there. So I'm having a reunion with the other porters. Do that every year, every single year. But the West Wing came over there, and the thing is, people in neuro IT, poor people in, well, not so much the people, not so much the patients, because the patients were out cold, most of them. Yeah. But a lot of them were in comas. Yet the visitors and that would look out the windows and they'd see this huge sea of grave markers. So I don't want to get the sun in your eyes. The sun's come out. So that's a bit ghoulish, I think, putting a neuro ITU there. But there's lots of examples of bad design in the hospital. Actually, I mean, I've talked about this on the HPWA blog, but you know, I mean, when in 1986, this is just before I joined, when they opened up the old cardiac unit, the beds wouldn't go into the lifts. They built the lifts and they couldn't get the beds in. And the thing is, the porters had told them that when we'd seen the blueprints of the building, we told them it wouldn't work. We told them the beds won't fit in there. And so they had several options. They could buy a completely new fleet of beds, which would cost millions, or they could replace the lifts altogether, which would cost hundreds of thousands. And they chose to replace the lifts because it was cheaper. And of course, they couldn't claim any insurance. No one is insured against their own stupidity, their own ignorance. They won't say, well, hang on, I'm an architect and I've got a degree in ergonomic design. I don't need advice from mere hospital porters. No. Well, they learnt the bloody hard way, that's all I can tell them. The moral of that story is always listen to porters, because hospital porters know what we're talking about. Oh, another example is the West Wing. Now, all this is basically the West Wing, which you see here. This is the whole place is the West Wing. But now you can't see this from public land, but on the far side, you can probably Google John Radcliffe. You'll see pictures of this. Google John Radcliffe Hospital. You'll see an atrium. Now there's there's like a big glass atrium built over in the main entrance. So you go in and you find yourself in this huge cavernous chamber, 5 stories high, from lower ground 2 to level 3. And when the lift goes up, it goes up on an external shaft which opens out onto these parapets, these terraces. Now, when they opened that, we said you're going to need. Cause now the edge of the terraces are like glass. There's a glass parapet about 5 feet high. And what we said, look, we said like when you get to lower ground, when you got to like level 2 or level 3, level 2, that's the highest level on the west wing, because as I said, the place is built into the side of the hill. So level 2 west wing is the same height as level 7 women's centre, you know. But we said at the time, you know, you need to enclose that, because you go out, you step out onto the terrace, and there's like this 5-foot barrier to stop you falling off, and you look over it, and there's like a 5-story drop onto the hard stone floor of lower ground 2 of the atrium outside the shops and everything, and the reception desk. And we said, you need to, you know, that's not good enough, you need to enclose it. And I said, well, there's nothing wrong with it, it's 5 feet high. I've got my degree in ergonomic architecture has taught me that's as high as a parapet needs to be to stop people falling off by accident. And we patiently, reporters, there's an article on it. I'll put a link to the HPWA blog. All right, you can just look these things up. I wrote about this at the time. We actually patiently explained to them that not everyone who falls off that terrace is going to fall off by accident. There are people in the hospital, patients, not just in the psychiatric wards, but in many parts of the hospital, who are in a very unstable mental condition, and very often the mental condition gets worse after they've been in their bed for a while. And this is a well-known fact. There's hospital fatigue, there's hospital trauma. This has been well and truly documented. People brought into hospital and have to stay in hospitals for very long periods. It affects their mental health. They suffer from hospital stress disorder, I think it's called, or something like that, where just being stuck inside these 4 walls is enough to drive you crazy, basically. Even so, you go in for a broken leg or something, you come out, then you end up a psychiatric patient simply. Oh, bloody awful. And they'll say, well, how do you know this, you hospital porter? You're not educated. You don't have a degree in ergonomic architecture. So how can you possibly know these things? It's true. I don't have a degree in anything. I've learnt this through having my head shoved up my arse for 23 years, pulling people down off window ledges who try to jump out. These windows here are locked. You can't open them. And the same on all the hospitals, even in the old part as well. That they've learnt through bitter experience. You cannot allow those windows to open, because people will jump out. They'll jump out and try and kill themselves every so often. And I've seen people they open like a crack, they open about 6 inches, and I've seen people on the window ledge trying to force the window to open further so they can jump out. And I've had to pull them off and hold them down while a nurse shoves a syringe of sedative into their thigh. That's how I know. Oh, sorry. Keep my voice down in here. But they wouldn't listen to the porters. They don't need advice from porters. There's a fly on there. Get off, go on, get off. And guess what happened? Someone actually did die that way. It was in the papers. You may have read it out in the papers. I certainly covered it on the HPWA website. Somebody climbed over. Someone got out of his bed one day, walked up to level 2 west wing, and climbed up onto the parapet and jumped off and fell to their death 60 feet below on the hard stone floor. Just like we said that would happen. We said it would bloody happen. They didn't listen to us. We said you have to enclose those terraces with floor-to-ceiling windows or walls. We said that. They didn't believe us. And a man died as a result. Now, so that's the West Wing there. And I did serve on overtime in the West Wing, but I had to go over the West Wing a lot. I mean, there's a separate porter's lodge there, which I was on overtime there a couple of times, and there was an awful man there. I should point out, even though, as I said, I love my brother porters dearly, there was some I didn't get on with, and there were some who were truly awful. There were some pretty alarming personalities actually in hospital portering. It was very often that some of them had been there a long time, and obviously it was the stress and trauma and whatever, the distress of it all to worn them down. Just like the nurses. I mean, nurses, midwives, they all get worn down through emotional trauma over the years, through having to deal with what we do at the hospital. Remember, you know, what we have to do. Things I would not repeat to you some of the things I've seen and some of the things I've done while I was in the hospital. I would not even utter the words to describe it. But basically, you can just imagine what happens when people are injured, when people are killed. Post-traumatic stress disorder is endemic within those walls. But it's not recognised. I mean, in the army, they get psychiatric care, they get a lot of public sympathy. We get nothing. We're told, you're only porters and you don't matter. Anyway, there was some there were some unpleasant people in there. Unpleasant indeed. But there were some people I didn't get on with. Now, there's one guy in particular who came up from the Radcliffe Infirmary, and he was an a-hole extraordinaire. And he was put in charge. He was a senior porter, and he eventually ended up as an assistant manager, as a-holes inevitably do. I mean, the thing is, like, one of the bad things about the NHS is, in any sensible institution, if you're a complete and utter... I'll talk more about this when I go through the HPWA pages, because I've got some specific examples of this. But if you're no good at your job in most institutions, they sack you. In this institution, they just promote you, they put you in charge. If you're no good at your job, just make them a manager. But there were some pretty awful people, and there were some annoying people. There were some, as I said, there were people who were just lazy, and you know, as I'll explain later in this film, laziness and incompetence is rewarded here. It is diligence and dedication that is punished. I was punished. There was these people there was these weird people with weird habits. There was these people I christened serial relievers. Now, a serial reliever is a guy who basically spends his entire adult life in hospital portering. But for some reason I could never fathom, every 2 or 3 years or so, he'd leave and get another job and then come back. And he'd leave, he'd say, right, I'm leaving. I've got another job, I'm going to another job. And he'd go to the other job. And we always knew, it was so predictable. We ended up kind of, we said, oh, he'll be back. We know he'll be back. We used to have sweepstake on when he'd be back. And then he'd be back. And he'd spend about 6 months in his new job, and then he'd come back to hospital portering. He'd reapply for his job, and he'd be taken back. I mean, it's very rare occasions that the management wouldn't take a serial reliever back. If for no other reason that person broke their service, so they had to start again from scratch, on the bottom pay increment, with the minimum leave allowances and things like that, and all the other benefits you accrue as your service lengthens. I mean, when I left, you know, I was on like 32 days a year leave, full sick pay, stuff like that. You know, you get there like the full works. When you start, you don't get that. You have to you earn it as you go up, and you go through pay increments from the lowest increment to the top increment. I was on the top increment, which you get after about 12 years. You can't go any higher after that, unfortunately, without being promoted. And I was never promoted. I was a basic grade porter for 23 years, and I take that as a compliment. As I say, only the a-holes got made managers. I was acting senior a couple of times. I was an acting senior porter. But I was never a full senior porter, even though I could have got it if I'd wanted it, and I didn't want it, and they didn't want me in it. They never offered it to me. Anyway, serial relievers, yeah, and there were a couple of these, and we knew they were. I mean, they were just serial relievers. They'd be into port in 2 years, and they'd be off doing another job, swearing that's it, I'm out, I'm never coming back. And we give them their leaving party and everything, and they'd be off. And then 6 months later, I'd walk in on a 6 to 2, and they'd be there in uniform, looking sheepish in front of the front. Behind the front desk, behind the desk porter, smiling, hi Ben. I said, he's back. And in the end, I'd laugh, I win. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I bet 5.5 months in the sweepstake. That's a serial. And there was about 6 or 7 of these serial relievers, and I never understood their motives. They would leave, and then they go into other things. They're usually something outside the hospital, although a couple of them became healthcare assistants and things like that, or they go and work in the ambulance service or on stores or something, doing something junior in the ambulance service. So I knew that I knew that most of them would leave the hospital, leave healthcare altogether, and be gone. And within 6 months they'd be back. Usually within 6 months, I bet. It's usually a few weeks to 6 months. Or there was one guy, he's my shift partner in theatres, right? There's a guy called Joey. Joey's a Filipino guy, and we used to fight like cat and dog, but we loved each other. We're still good friends. But he left. He went and got a very, very high-paid casual job at the car factory. And I said, Joey, you sure you want to do this? And he said, yes, Ben, I'm absolutely sure. I'm absolutely sure I want to do this. I really do. I said, okay, mate. And I gave him that sort of look, which said, he'll be back. The following night, it was a night shift, right? He left in the morning, right? He started his new job the following night. He phoned me up at 3 AM in the lodge, almost in tears. But can I come back? Please, could you leave a message for Chris? Chris is our senior porter. Could you please leave a message for Chris asking if I can come back? And Chris took him back. I mean, being a serial reliever was strange, not least because if you basically are attached to hospital portering, why keep leaving? It's almost like they're paying. I don't understand the imperative to actually go through this process of quitting the job, doing something else for a short time, then coming back. Why not just stay? If you love portering so much, stay. But the problem is that they, I think, because some of them were. Because hospital portering is the thing which a lot of people loved and wouldn't admit it. I'm one of the few that would admit I loved it. And I made some enemies. It's strange, you know, that it's funny what people will hate you for, because you can be a complete and utter scumbag and you'll get respect. People will respect you, they'll revere you, they'll look up to you. You can do something else which is completely harmless, in which there is no injured party, and you'll be despised for it. And I mean, I've got to bring up Slaxer here. Now, Slaxer doesn't despise me. Slaxer and I actually like each other very much. But he was intensely irritated with my dignity statements. Now, I've talked about this before. I've got an entire video about Slaxer. I've done 2 entire videos about Slaxer. You can find. I'm not going to put links in the description box. You can find them by putting his name into the search engine in my channel. But you know, Slaxer was intensely irritated by the dignity statements. Now, I've talked about, as I said, I'm not going to go through the dignity statement thing. I did that last year, I think, on last year's St Theo's video. But the dignity statement was something I developed as a coping mechanism, as a way of disarming unpleasant other people, as I explained. When other people, and there was a lot of them, a lot of people were nasty in that hospital. As I said, mostly like the nurse, you know, nurses, doctors, people who look down at you, people who talk down at you. They're everywhere. It's a daily hazard. It's one of the occupational hazards of hospital portering. And the dignity statements was something I devised to address that, to deal with it. And Slaxer got very annoyed with me for that. I still don't understand why. He's the one who's always complaining about passive aggression, and I found a method of defence against passive aggression, and he chews my ass off for it. I don't understand, Slaxer, why. I really don't. I wish you'd explain why that upset you so much. But anyway, there are a lot of other people who were very, very irritated by the fact that I loved my work. I mean, to love your job, to love your profession. Because it wasn't a job. This is not a job, being in here. It's a way of life. It's a culture. It's everything. I mean, it's whether you like it or not, or know it or not, it is. When you go in there, you start a new life, not a new job. When I got kicked out in 2012, I wasn't just losing a job. I was perhaps more like an old soldier who has to leave the army. It was like that. It was a total transformation of every aspect of my life. My social life. I once worked out that in the heart of my service in this hospital, every single person I knew, every mate, every girlfriend, every acquaintance was in some way connected through my social circles of this hospital. Every single one of them. Apart from the people I knew online, everybody I knew in this hospital. And to love your work is something incredible because it's almost like an anathema. It's like work can't really be work unless you hate it, unless it's a drudgery that you despise and want to get over with as quickly as possible. Otherwise it's not really work, and therefore you are lazy because you're doing something which you love and you're getting paid for it, and it's not fair. And I don't like it. You shouldn't be allowed to do that. So maybe it's envy if you love your work. And I did love it. I mean, I used to come to work looking forward to it, smiling, feeling happy. Even towards the end when things got worse, I would still, after a long period of sickness or being on leave, I'd come thinking, it's so good to get back to work. It's so nice to come back. So even in the last few years when things did go downhill, I'll talk more about that later, it was good to come back. It was good to come home. And maybe it was envy, maybe because people who didn't love their work saw that and they felt envious. They felt, or maybe it's just, like I say, it's the logic of it, that work can't be good. Work can't be something you love. I mean, it can be if if for instance you are a writer, or you're in the armed forces, or you're doing some high status job like being a pilot or something. Then you can love your work, but not if you're a hospital porter. That's not allowed, I tell you. It's against the law. And the worst of all, right, were the worst people, the people who hated me the most, and there was one guy in particular who was especially belligerent, especially hostile, were the ex-hospital porters who'd become nurses. And I knew a few of them. Who'd supposedly gone, quote, unquote, up the ladder. This is the term they used. Because when they did that, they were porters and they decided to improve themselves, go up the ladder. Because I hated being porters. I mean, I knew who they were. They were the people like we go to staff parties, we go to departmental parties where the porters and civilians mix. And we'd be like in a social club, we'd hire the social club, and then the porters would be like round the pool table and the dartboard with their pints of lager. And you get like the nurses and the doctors sitting around the table with their glasses of white wine and, and mineral water, and talking about the safari they did in Kenya. And some of the porters would look wistfully just over at that table thinking, I want to be a part of that life. I want to be a part of that society. I don't want to be a part of this one. There was one guy in particular who really hated me. And he hated me because he was a porter and he became a nurse, and I didn't, and I loved being a porter, and he thought that shouldn't be allowed. He basically thought what I was doing should be made illegal, and he couldn't cope with it. I mean, I'd like to ask him, what was I doing? What harm was I doing him by being different to him? Which in act was all I was doing. All I was doing was being different to him. I had a different spin on life, a different a different idea of life, a different spin. As David Icke talked, being different. And in no way was anything I did made him the injured party. In no way. Yet he treated me with more hostility. If I'd nicked his car, he'd be more well disposed towards me. This guy. His name's Jack. I won't tell you anything more about him. There's lots of people called Jack, so I'm not breaching his privacy. His name is Jack. But at one point he hurled abuse at me in a pub. We were in a pub. He was a bit drunk. I was in the pub with Andy, another porter. Well, this is when I was in theatres, and we were having the after dinner drink, as you did, the after work drink, as you did. And this guy hurled abuse at me in front of everyone. Swore at me. It's a very odd thing, isn't it, to want to control somebody else's life, not a member of your family or your kid or anything, but another adult male. And you're turning to him and saying, look, you've got to do with your life what I tell you to do with it. You can't do with your life what you want. You want to do with your life is what I tell you. Because for him, I think it's like there was no other option. For him, it's just a no-brainer that all porters have to want to be nurses, and if you have the ability to become a nurse, you have to do it. Otherwise, you're breaching some kind of rule. And for him, that was just so much part of his life that he didn't consider there was any other path he could have taken. And so when someone comes out along and just says, look, there is another path to take, it's not one that I demand that you do, it's one that I've chosen. the response is, does not compute, and steam comes out of his ears like a Star Trek robot that's been given an illogical instruction. Yeah, so there were people like that. There's some nice people too. I mean, there's I did some stupid things. I made mistakes. I made many mistakes. I did some very stupid things. I fell in love several times. One of the worst was, oh man, you see, I did something very stupid. I fell in love with a woman who was completely out of my league and I had no chance with, but I became besotted with her. Her name's Vicky, and she was served in the trauma unit, which I showed you just now. She's a trauma nurse. And I fell head over heels in love with her. It was almost love at first sight. And she was very nice about it, but she basically said no. And I was sad about it, but she was very nice about the whole thing. She didn't say, get lost, loser. She sort of kindly just explained to me that it wasn't on. But Vicky was lovely. She was beautiful. That was just to see, because I had a couple of girlfriends. See, when I never really had a relationship, a proper relationship, until I met Sue Estain, I just split up from. And I don't think I will again. I don't want to get into. I don't want another relationship now. I'm just sort of like, I think that's it. I mean, I just want to be single, really. But I'm not going to do what I did before. And in a sense, I mean, it's the kind of thing that I wouldn't do now. This is what I mean when I was in a way, I was quite immature for my age. And the porters basically fathered me. They became my fathers. A couple in particular virtually adopted. There's a guy called Barry who virtually became a surrogate father to me when my dad was crawling around all fours, licking the ground that my mum walked on, and sort of like, saying yes, jumping up and doing whenever my mum pressed a button on the remote control, he'd go and do it. Those men became my surrogate fathers, and Barry in particular. Barry was a civilian, actually. He was not a porter. He worked in the telephonist section. He worked on the switchboard. But he became like a surrogate father to me. I'm still in touch with Barry. I hardly ever see him. We haven't fallen out. We've just drifted apart. He's older. A lot of younger guys will sort of latch onto an older man, especially if they don't have a father figure in their life. And I was one of them. Barry's now retired. He's in his 60s, and he's got himself a woman, and he's happy. He's adopted her son, And so, how I got kicked out of theatres, I'll just explain more about another day. I'll write an article on HPWA about it, maybe talk about it in next year's St Theo's film. So I'll start with the article on HPWA. So check out the HPWA blog. There'll be links in the description box to those. But basically, I'll explain in a minute. I'm gonna sort of like I'm going to have a little walk through the hospital, actually, and then I'll carry on, because I'm going to have to go home. I'll carry on the discussion on the other side. Well, I'm now at the west entrance now of the hospital, which is the Woodlands Road entrance. And this, I suppose you could call the Tickaboo Peak of the John Radcliffe, as opposed to the Groom Lake Road of the John Radcliffe, which is where that cemetery was. It's further away from the hospital, but you get a slightly better view. You can just see here the staff accommodation block. This is actually the creche, where the daycare centre for the children of the staff, and behind it you can see there's grey blocks up there. That is the staff accommodation called Arthur Sanctuary House. There's some more staff flats on the other side, which I can't show you today. That is called Ivy Lane, and this is basically accommodation for people who work there. Some of the people who serve at the hospital actually live on the hospital site in those accommodation blocks. The hospital does provide in some cases free accommodation, in some cases very low rent accommodation for its staff. I always lived off site, as I explained. I never actually lived here, but that's one thing you can do. And amazingly, there was a guy, one of the porters, a chap called Tony, Scouser. He knows who he is if he's watching. Tony, he was really I won't say too much about him because I've told you what his name is now, and some people might recognise him. I don't want to give too much information out about the various issues he had, but let's just say he had a couple of issues that are kind of quite common among hospital porters, and the result of these issues was that he was quite unreliable with his timekeeping. You know, if he'd be late he'd turn up late for his shifts and things like that, or he'd go off sick too often when there's nothing really wrong with him. Nothing that wasn't self-inflicted, at least. So Tony actually lived at Ash, after Sanctuary House, and somehow, even though it was literally a 100-yard walk between, I mean, he was on delivery suite with me for a while, and he used to follow me often. He was on the shift which often followed me, and somehow he could still end up being late almost every day. Now, this is an example about the rot which set in, one of the things that got worse and worse as time went on. Now, if you were late for your shift when I was started, you'd be marked as absent, and when you were next seen, when you next were in the vicinity of the boss, you'd have some major explaining to do about where the hell you were, and you could get into big trouble if you were absent. If you didn't turn up at work, you didn't phone in or anything, you'd be in big trouble. You'd have some serious explaining to do. You might even face official disciplinary action. By the time I left hospital portering, it was rare to find a porter who actually showed up on time every day for their shifts. It was just completely and utterly acceptable and normal for porters to just turn up basically an hour late, half an hour late, an hour late, 10 minutes late. Didn't matter. Because it didn't matter because the quality of service didn't matter to anyone. Because the quality of service in the NHS does not matter. Because it's been run down, it's been degenerated. It's a parasitic bureaucracy. This has reached the end of which has basically sucked off its host to the point where the host is now on the verge of death, and then the parasite will die. I don't want to get political here, all right? I don't want to start going about government policy and towards the NHS policy and things like that. But suffice to say, like, there's an election coming up next week. It doesn't matter who you vote for. The same thing is going to happen. All the major parties basically don't have any policy which can actually solve this situation. Not to the extent that it's set in now. Not to the severity and the progression that it's gone to. But anyway, the staff accommodation. Yeah, Tony late every day, and I'd complain about it, and he'd say, "Well, no one's stopping you going home at the end of your shift, Ben. Just go home. Fuck off home. Don't wait for me." So I'm supposed to leave the department unmanned. And the thing about it is, if I did that, no one's going to mind, except that the midwives got pissed off if I left early. The midwives would get pissed off. Patients wouldn't get the service they require. No one's going to get into trouble. I'm not going to get into trouble, and Tony's not going to get into trouble. But that's the idea. That kind of thing was encouraged. I'll say more about that in later on. But that kind of attitude, was encouraged. As I said, people who loved being a porter were not popular. You got a lot of enemies. Some of it was envy, and some of it was also because you were a threat. Because you demanded more. You had an ideological vision of a better hospital than what the hospital was, and they don't want people like that. They want people who are just willing to accept the status quo. I'm walking away from the hospital now. I had a little stroll through, actually. I went in by the trauma unit. Oh God, it hasn't changed that bit. I went in through the £3 million trauma unit. That's where Vicky was. Oh God, have you ever done? You must have done something in your life where you think, oh God, why did I do that? And my relationship or non-relationship with Vicky was one of those. It was just such a stupid adolescent thing to do. That for a man in his late 20s, early 30s, he's just to fall in love like a lovesick 15-year-old is just so pathetic, and I just kick myself whenever I think about it. Not that Vicky was very attractive, obviously, but it was just such a stupid thing to do, to go so completely and utterly overboard on her. Anyway, I won't dwell on that. So I walked through by the trauma unit, and I came out. Now, there's some things have changed. They put up some new pictures in the trauma corridor, and I came out onto where the escalators is, and there was a switchboard where Barry used to be, my father, my dad, I can go along and see him. And sometimes on night shift, he'd be there on nights with this guy called Rod, he was always on nights with. And when I was on nights, I'd go and sort of sit with him for a bit, have a cup of tea, be on switchboard. No, he's a good guy, Barry. He is a good guy. Love him to bits. Even I hardly ever see him these days. And then I walked up the escalators, and the League of Friends has now got a big glass wall around. The League of Friends is like this voluntary run cafeteria. That's got a big like glass wall around it. And I walked on a bit further. I'm going to just stop filming for a bit because coming to the main road. Yeah, so I carried on walking. I carried on walking along the main street main side, old JR2, level 2, and past. There was the doors to outpatients and to outpatients X-ray, level 2 X-ray. You go around there and there's the gamma camera and things like that, and then there's the chapel and there's endoscopy. Go along this big wide corridor called the main street, main side, and then I bumped into someone who I won't give you her name actually, because she's someone I know. I bumped into a person I know there who was there when I was there, and we had a little conversation. And I wished her a happy St Theo's Day, and she smiled. And she says, "That time of year again?" And I said, "Yes." And she's a civilian. I won't, like I say, I'm not going to tell you what her job is, but she's really on my side when I talk about St Theo's Day and everything. She understands it. You know, she really understands it. And when I went and took in the St Theo's flyers last week, I saw her there, and she sent me over to the women's centre where I had to drop off the flyers for somebody to pick up at a drop-off point where I knew they were going to, where they told me to leave them so that they can pick them up. And I spoke to a couple of other people and talked about St Theo's Day and stuff like that, and they understood where I was coming from. And we had a nice conversation there, and it really is nice that. And then I went out through the level 2 entrance. Oh yeah. And how it's transformed, it's unbelievable. It's like there's a Marks and Spencer's there now. It's just so bloody corporate. They've rebuilt it several times over the last few years. I mean, this is the thing about the NHS. I don't know if it's the same in all government institutions, but I'm reminded of the film Brazil. If you haven't seen the film Brazil, it's really good. It's like a satirical comedy, kind of like George Orwell with laughs. Do watch it. There's one scene where this van is driving down this road, and alongside the road are billboards, sideways, wall-to-wall billboards along both sides of the road showing beautiful country scenery. And beyond it, you can see there's nothing, everything's devastated. There's just a wasteland. And it's a bit like that with the hospital. I mean, however decrepit the hospital gets, the policy now is, look, just make it look good. Just make it look good. I mean, honestly, if raw sewage was leaking out of the second level basement, someone will come along and say, "Anyone got any air fresheners?" That's what they do. The amount of money and effort they've spent on making things look good at the hospital, and just simply making it look good, it's incredible. Compared to, so I'm about to run out of battery. I'll have to wait till I get home. But anyway, and so that seems to be the way. That seems to be the policy now. Just make it look good. And they've spent so much time doing up the entrance, redesigning it, putting in new wallpaper, new furniture. And then it doesn't escape the fact that, you know, the staff aren't trained properly. There's filth everywhere. You know, people are dying. 5,000 people died of preventable infections and things like that. And the system's falling apart. But it doesn't matter. We've got a branch of Marks and Spencer's in the lobby. Main entrance. See, they're even using words like hotels now. And that's really part of the problem with corporatism generally. And the state, and corporations are essentially state entities. It's not capitalism, it's as wrong as people wrongly call it. Is it has this, it says just keep up the pretense and everything will be fine. It's like the band, you know, the string quartet playing on the decks of the Titanic as it goes down, if you remember from that film. Anyway, Now it's time to explore some of the good and the bad and the ugly that's been going on in the hospital portering world over the past year.
Now let's go through some of the delights that have been happening in the world since the last St Theo's day. Well, in August last year, someone called Maha Yasai was actually in trouble. Now, she was a chief pharmacist at the NHS Berkshire West Primary Care Trust, and she was dismissed after disciplinary procedures. Yes, seems to happen all the time these days, because she alerted senior management to her concerns, which included a colleague of hers who was being bribed by a pharmaceutical company to prescribe certain drugs, and a doctor who attempted to commit suicide using controlled drugs from her pharmacy. Now, Mrs. Yasai was got into trouble in the same way. Amazingly, just like me, she was labelled a bully. She was accused of bullying other members of staff. Now, she was cleared of these allegations, but was still sacked at the end on the grounds that her relationship with the trust had broken down. Cool, that's convenient, isn't it? Very conveniently vague. Now, she believes this was an attempt to cover up the misconduct that she had alerted them to. Now, an independent investigator was appointed and told Mrs. Yasai, "If I had your values, I would find it difficult to work in the NHS." Isn't that true, isn't it? And that's the point, isn't it? I mean, these parallels between Maha Yasai and my experience in 2012, they're amazing. I was accused of bullying, and in my case, the allegation was particularly heinous because my alleged victim was disabled, which means that he suffered from a comparatively minor learning difficulties and is registered under the Protection of Vulnerable Adults law. But the thing is, like, basically, honesty is not the best policy if you want a long and fruitful career in the British public health care. Definitely. I got very upset because I found out that at the last St Theo's Day, I found out that at the time of my discharge, a man who I was working with then is still there now, and this is a man who's notoriously bad at his job. He's lazy, he's untrustworthy, he's incompetent, he's unreliable, but he is tolerated and I am not. He's still there when I am not. Management simply will not sack him. They won't even reprimand him. Now, I've christened these kinds of porters the untouchables. I had the serial relievers earlier, now I'm talking about the untouchables, yeah. Now, this man understands very well his privilege. He arrogantly laughs in the face of anyone who criticises him. I remember, every time he sneaked away for another of his 3-hour cigarette breaks, every time he went off early from duty, every time he was late the next day or off sick for no reason, he would just shrug his shoulders and he'd smile and say, "What are you going to do about it? I'm perfectly safe. I'm ring-fenced from all criticism." The better you are at your job, the more you get picked on. It's very frustrating, and it's true. If I didn't know any better, I'm being sarcastic now. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that the NHS doesn't want decent servicemen. They actually favour dullards and delinquents, who they know will run the system into the ground. I mean, when I posted this on HPWA. People were telling me continuously that they had been through similar situation where they've been victimised for being honourable and hard-working. Every day that passes, I regret the ending of my NHS portering career less and less, and maybe this is why. Now, I don't know how many of you watch Dave Cullen on YouTube. Computing Forever, he's known as. Now, I don't often talk about social media activity on the HWA and on this video, but I'm going to talk about this because now Dave Cullen, he's an Irish YouTuber, goes by the handle Computing Forever. You might have seen him. He's quite well known, and he made a video called Debunking Marxist Sargonism, which is a critique of another YouTuber I like called Sargon of Akkad, whom I've talked about before. It doesn't matter what the nature of Sargon and Dave's argument is, so to speak, in this context, but about 23 minutes into the film, for about 15 minutes, he brings up the subject of janitors. Now, janitors is what the Irish call a cleaner. And I felt that he was treating it in a very similar way to Richard Dawkins, who was a bit of a stuck-up bastard who patronised an Indian street cleaner. And I made a comment. I made a comment underneath, and this is it. I don't agree with Sargon, but on the subject of janitors, what we in England call cleaners, earning more, you're right, they should not get paid as much as the software designers whose offices they clean, let alone the CEO. However, correct me if I misunderstood you, it's a mistake simply to shrug, like Atlas, your shoulders and pull the bottom out of their employment contract. They are still essential members of the company's team in their own way. No software gets produced if the offices are dirty and the bins are overflowing. Likewise, if Wall Street is not swept clean, Manhattan would very quickly become buried under a mountain of its own waste. These jobs may be low-skilled, but they are not no-skilled. In departments of so-called quote-unquote menial jobs, where the staff turnover is too high, the unwritten tricks of the trade become lost. I was a hospital porter for 23 years and I watched it happen. I saw the service degenerate over time, and this resulted directly in the loss of quality across the board to the point where over 5,000 patients a year were dying in the British NHS from preventable infections. So you neglect the janitors, etc. at your cost. By all means, keep their wages and conditions down to a reasonable level, but not too low. Keep their services professional and not casualised. Make those people feel appreciated and proud of their contribution to the business. And I can't add any more than that. Now, of course, the big news of this last couple of years was the junior doctor strikes. Now, there was another one booked for September. Now, the NHS junior doctors went on strike in the spring of 2016 for the first time ever in the service's 70-year history. They did it to protest against new contracts which would cause a cut in their pay and increase their workload. Oh yeah, exactly, of course, what else? There was a lot of public support for them, and they even wrote a song that went to the top of the hit parade. It was very, very good, that. Now, this has become the biggest act of industrial action ever in the NHS. And now, strikes in the NHS are a very serious matter. When the railways go on strike, long-distance commuters might miss a day's work. When health services go on strike, people die. It's that simple. There's no doubt about it. This is the dilemma we face. However, the state of healthcare in Britain today is such a sorry one that I think it is now immoral not to strike. We need to do whatever it takes to change things. Far more people will die from our inaction than from any walkouts. I made this point over last year's J.R. Porter strike, if you remember that. Now, the first juniors doctor strike was supposed to begin on the 12th of September, and particularly the media has been scathing. It talks about plotting and things like that. It emphasises the loss of service the strike will provide. It portrays the doctors as selfish and cowardly when they're actually doing the most dedicated and brave thing imaginable. I was 100% behind the junior doctor strike. I'm just sorry it never went further, to be honest. They really, really deserved to do what they did. Right, some happy news. Yes, John Jackson, who's a porter at the Royal Blackburn Hospital, has just won the Kate Granger Award for Compassionate Care. This was an award set up by Dr. Kate Granger, MBE, when she was terminally ill with cancer, and sadly she died in July of 2016 after selecting the latest winner. One of the last things she did was select 2016's winner. She basically set up the award to decorate healthcare staff who show especially kind and thoughtful conduct towards patients. I couldn't be happier. I'm over the moon at this news. My extremely proud and dignified brother porter John Jackson. My sincerest congratulations. I salute you, brother porter. Well done. You're an inspiration to the entire service. Right, now, if anyone's interested, I have a few words of advice based on my quite considerable experience. For anybody who is seeking to join the NHS and have a long, successful, secure and trouble-free career in this great institution, Britain's National Health Service. Do you want to know what to do? Do your job as badly as you possibly can. Make sure that you are the laziest and most incompetent shitbag in your department. Come on duty late every day. Skive as much as you can. Sneak off before the end of your shift. Take at least one day off sick a week, and just do a couple of work breaks between your cigarette duty, okay? If, or rather when, you are promoted to senior management grades, be a total, greedy, corrupt, stupid, gutless, destructive and irresponsible bastard. You take my advice and I can 100% guarantee that the NHS will never sack you. On the contrary, you will go a long way. If you be contemptible enough, and you'll be treated as one of the favourites in the entire service. Now, the NHS only sacks people for making videos in their spare time, or for being too honest, like Mahia say. And we've got another example here. This is despicable. And this is it's just so typical and predictable, but it's so horrible. This is about an NHS nurse, Sarah Coute. She's a fully trained, highly experienced NHS nurse, and she started out nursing in London over 15 years ago, and she ended up a ward sister. Since 2012, she was a sister in the intensive care unit at Darrant Valley Hospital in Kent. So she's an extremely valuable member of staff with her experience and thousands of pounds invested in her training. Then she received complaints from patients, apparently. Now, complaints in the NHS are anonymous and can be concocted by management. And this is what they did to me. Then what were these alleged complaints about, Sister Cootie? What was she doing? Slapping people around? Groping male patients' bottoms? Stealing money from their bedside lockers? No! She told patients that she would pray for them, and even gave one of them a Bible. Yes, it really is as bad as that. Now, Sister Coute is a devout Christian, and she regards this as extraneous to her job. Now, like all frontline NHS staff, patients will talk to you about their personal feelings. They'll talk to you about their health, their conditions. Now, I was always told, don't get involved in discussions about a patient's illness and stuff like that. But it's a topic that's impossible to avoid. And their feelings, the way they talk to you when you're wheeling them along, as a porter especially, you're in this position, they will want to open out to you. You can't avoid it. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't try to avoid it. I think it's an important part of the healing process. Now, one of her duties, right, she was actually doing her job. One of Sister Coute's duties was to ask patients about their religious beliefs. Now, this is normal practice for ITU patients because basically it's a grim reason that can't be avoided. In case they get a terminal prognosis, they might request the last rites or something similar, and they might go off the theatre and not come back, as is often the case. They might go straight from there to the PM suite, and this is why religion is brought up in nurse-patient relationships and their discussion. Now, there's a questionnaire that the nurse fills in for the patient, and this often leads to a discussion about religious faith. And if the patient was interested in Sister Coute's beliefs, sometimes she just described that, and Sister Coute actually talked about her own beliefs as well, and in the end she offered to pray for the patients. And management at the Dartford and Gravesham NHS Trust were concerned that Sister Coute's unwanted discussions were upsetting the patients. I'd no doubt at some point the words offensive, unprofessional and inappropriate came into that conversation. Now, she had warnings previously that she supposedly had not heeded, and as a result she was summarily suspended from duty and escorted off the hospital site like a bloody criminal. She was forbidden to talk to her colleagues, except for her unison representatives. And in fact, the news story about this, she actually broke down in tears when she described this experience to a reporter, and it makes God, I'm starting to feel tearful myself. I'm sorry, but it's just fucking disgusting. Bastards, scumbags. She was dismissed in August last year and had her appeal rejected, and she was not allowed to bring any witnesses to the tribunal. She's a mother of 3 children, and she's now suing the trust for unfair dismissal. I can't wish her enough success. She should take those deplorable scumfucks for every penny they got right to the top. I mean, these vicious little pieces of turds who always float to the top in NHS administration. Like I say, they won't sack you, they promote you if you're crap at your job. And I mean, I'm concerned generally about the way Christians are treated in modern society. And I'm a non-Christian, I'm a lapsed Catholic. Now, you never, for instance, you never treat a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu in this way. And even atheists now are quite correctly asserting their human rights. Now, so I can't help thinking that, I mean, apart from the issue with the NHS, Sister Sarah Coute is a thought criminal, a prisoner of conscience. Her enemies are both the NHS and cultural Marxism. I just hope, I don't know, I'll have to look up on this story, find out what happened, but I hope she got a fortune off them. I really do. I salute her as a civilian colleague. someone who's been persecuted and expelled because her relationship with a trust had broken down. Oh God, I hate these people. I really do. I'm glad I'm out of it. I really am. Fucking bastards. I don't want to work for them. I think I'm happier now I'm not working for them. It's a weight. It is a weight off my conscience. It really is. Now I've had a look at hospital porters in the media. Now this is this is an interesting subject. I've been following the way the media portrays members of our ancient and noble profession, and I have to confess to being enormously dismayed. Now, almost universally, hospital porters are portrayed in one of two forms. We are either nameless cameo roles who come and go in the background while the Richard Chamberlains and the Kenneth Williamses of this world bask in the limelight, or with these inferior feeling insecure individuals who are frustrated with their lowly position in life. And now the media history of hospital porters began in 1964 with an American slapstick comedy called The Disorderly Orderly, starring Jerry Lewis. He's a porter at a chronic care sanatorium who rose from one funny and embarrassing situation to the next. Now the film is a shallow, weak, pale imitator of the British Carry On films, but it doesn't have the Carry On style or wit. And Lewis's character is only serving as an orderly because he couldn't get into medical school. And this is a recurring theme in media portrayals of hospital porters, and I'll come back to that. Now, there's only one departure from the two main stereotypes that I've ever come across, and it's in the 1980 film by David Lynch called The Elephant Man. And this is an adaptation of the true life story of Joseph Merrick, who was a grossly disfigured man who lived in Victorian London. There's a book written about this in 1942 by Ashley Montague, and it's called The Elephant Man, and subtitled A Study in Human Dignity, which is ironic considering how the film dealt with the subject of hospital porters. Now the film deviates from the historical facts. It's inspired by the book, but it deviates from the historical facts in order to add energy to the plot. And one of those deviations has Merrick kidnapped from the hospital where he's being treated by an unscrupulous freak show owner, and the cruel man who helps organise the abduction is one of the hospital's porters, who is played by Michael Elphick. So the score for hospital porter portrayals is, so far, conformist stereotype 1, evil greedy bastard 1. Will things get any better? No, they don't. They get far, far worse. Now the next stop on our journey is this Holby City, or Casualty, these long-running BBC dramas. The series is set in a contemporary British NHS hospital, and nearly all the characters are doctors and nurses, or PAMs, receptionists, managers, social workers, etc. There's only one major character who's ever been a porter, and he was called Jimmy Powell, and he was in the series between 1989 and 1991, and he was played by Robson Green. Now, Robson Green went on to do a lot of very good TV series and dramas. He was in something called Soldier, which was a very good program, I remember, and he was a detective as well. He's a very good actor. But unfortunately, Jimmy's main purpose in the story, from what I could see, was to walk around with his head bowed and his shoulders slumped, in shame, whining, "Oh no, I wish I was a nurse, I wish I was a nurse, I wish I wasn't only a porter." So, yeah, pretty lousy that was. Now, the absolute nadir is stooped to in 1990 in a film called Paper Mask. It's a little-known film, and obscurity has never been more richly deserved. This deeply insulting and patronising travesty in the way it characterised hospital porters stars Paul McGann. He plays a hospital porter a bit like Jimmy, devastating inferiority complex, deep regrets that he hasn't gone up the ladder and done something better with his life, man, not wasting his life being just a porter. And he hasn't got the bus fare upstairs to study and become a doctor, so that he dreams of being. So he steals the identity as a doctor at his hospital, one who gets killed in a car crash. And the rest is he impersonates this doctor, and it's awful. It's a disgusting film. I'm sad to say that there was only one single fictional source I know of where hospital porters are portrayed in a positive light, and that's in my own novel, Evans Land. So check that out, where there's an actual respectful portrayal of hospital porters. And it's one that I wrote. That's how bad things are. Now, apparently the NHS is a humanitarian crisis. This is very amusing. There was a debate on the BBC's Victoria Derbyshire show a couple of months ago about the state of the NHS, and it's recently emerged in the news that 40% of hospitals have submitted alert reports to the Department of Health concerning a breakdown in the fundamental function across the board. Patients in A&E have been treated on trolleys in corridors. Up to 14 people in England and Wales are on the waiting list for some kind of surgical treatment, and the delay is sometimes life-threatening. Like there's patients that need urgent cardiac operations or cancer biopsies, and they've been knocked back down the list. And it was interesting because there was like a debate program, and the studio audience were people. They were NHS service personnel, patients, politicians, experts, etc. Now, the thing about it is, it's strange there was a debate about this, because if you throw a stone up into the air, you could predict pretty closely, and I'd really be willing to put a rather large amount of money on the fact that it will fall back down to the ground due to the force of gravity of the Earth. And this is very, very simple. It's very similar with the NHS. It's the simplest and most obvious cause and effect prediction I can imagine is what we're talking about with the NHS too. I mean, I've seen the system degenerate year and year and year from the inside. The NHS has been starved of funds, it's been grossly mismanaged, and there's a limit on how incompetent someone can be by accident. It's been done deliberately. This is sabotage. Sabotage on an unbelievable scale. Now, the UKIP leader, Paul Nuttall, said that the NHS needs more privatisation. I don't agree with that. I'm not a socialist. I don't favour public over private institutions for ideological reasons. I'm opposed to privatisation of the NHS as a simple practical reality. And I've got to apologise for my black pill pessimism, but it's an academic question because it's a fait accompli. If anyone suggests to me that there should be more privatisation within the NHS, I respond that that's a bit like suggesting water should be diluted. I'm sorry to end this little section on such a grim note, but it's actually true. I mean, that's just the way things are. Well, I mean, thanks for listening to all these little news stories. Now, if you want to read the articles where these particular news stories come from, it's very easy. Go to the link in the description box to the HPWA blog. That's Hospital Porters Welfare Association, and they're all there, and you can see them and read about all the things I've talked about. I'll be adding more articles to that blog very soon, even though it's not as active as my other blogs. But keep an eye on it. I understand that a lot of you lately have taken an interest in the contents of my nose, so I've given you a bit of a look up there. Now, this year's St Theo's Day party, is not on the June the 1st, which is the Feast of St Theo. St Theobald of Ruggiero, as I've explained in the previous video, is the patron saint of hospital porters. He was born in 1170 in Piedmont, Italy, so he was a long time ago. And he became famous for carrying sick people into town so they could see a doctor. And that's why I celebrate his feast day, because he's our patron saint. It's not always possible for various reasons. For instance, I'm doing HPANWO radio tomorrow. I can't always have the St Theo's Day party on St Theo's Day. It's going to be Monday the 5th of June. Okay, it's going to be at the Britannia Inn in Headington, in Oxford. And there's the St Theo's Day flyer published on the HPWA blog. So you'll be able to see that if you go to the link in the description box. 7 PM, like I said. 7 PM, Monday the 5th. And I do hope to see you there. Everyone's welcome. Hospital porter, civilian, doesn't matter. You can come along, you can talk, you can have fun, you can look up my nose again if you want. That's absolutely fine by me. So thank you all for watching. I want to wish you all, whether I see you at the party or not, a very, very happy St Theo's Day 2017. Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Now, of course, I've talked before about the hospital social life, hospital portering social life especially, and there'd be the usual thing, end of late shift, off to the social club, pint there, get home, get dressed, get changed in downtown, clubbing, as I used to do when I used to have money to do that sort of thing. And sometimes we'd be in a pub and we'd be talking to some young women, attractive young women, and what happened is this happened once, and one of my brother porters turned to me, took me to one side, he grabbed my shoulders, Ben, Don't tell them we're porters. Tell them we work at a hospital if you have to, but don't tell them we're porters. And so, of course, when the inevitable question came up, what do you all do? I said, we're hospital porters. And my brother porter, my friend, he looked at me glaring. He said, thanks, Ben, great. And but there were pimps and drug dealers who were not ashamed. It's just incredible. This brother porter of mine, actually, he didn't want these girls to know that we were hospital porters because of that attitude. And the thing is, if someone has a bad attitude towards us, whose problem is it? It's their problem, not ours. Why should we make it our problem? Why should we be ashamed? Why should we, essential members of a life-saving team, cover up for ourselves, conceal what we are as if we have something to be guilty about and shameful of? Not this porter, believe me, it's not happening.